The space station, broken gear, was a nasty place. It smelled like burnt oil, old sweat, and trouble. It was built inside a hollowed-out asteroid, spinning slowly in the dark of deep space. Inside the main bar, the air was thick with smoke. This was where the toughest aliens in the galaxy came to hide, trade illegal parts, or start a fight. Huge, three-eyed Krells were shouting over their drinks, their deep voices sounding like rocks grinding together. Skyly Gorax, creatures that looked like giant, angry lizards, were smashing chairs just for fun. It was loud, dangerous, and messy, but in the far corner, away from the flashing neon lights, sat a human. He didn't look like much. He wasn't tall, and he didn't have huge muscles. He looked old, not the kind of old where you are weak, but the kind of old where you have seen too much. He was tired. His hair was gray, and his skin was tanned from the radiation of too many suns. He wore a faded, dark green jacket. It was torn at the edges and stained with grease, but it had a small, silver pin on the collar. The pin was shaped like a broken wing. The human just sat there, staring at his glass of plain water. He didn't have a gun on his hip. He didn't have a knife on his belt. He looked like a janitor who had lost his way. A young Krell warrior named Zark noticed him. Zark was big, even for a Krell. He wanted to show off in front of his friends. He wanted to prove he was the boss of this station. He walked over to the corner, his heavy boots making the floor shake. "Hey, little monkey." Zark laughed. His three eyes zoomed in on the human. The bar started to go quiet. People liked a show, and they expected the human to scream and run. "That's a nice jacket. It looks warm. I think I want it. Give it to me or I'll break your arms like dry sticks." The human didn't move. He didn't even blink. He just took a slow sip of his water. It was like Zark wasn't even there. The silence in the bar became heavy. Even the Gorax stopped smashing chairs to watch. This was an insult. In this part of the galaxy, if someone threatened you, you fought or you begged. You didn't just keep drinking water. "I'm talking to you, meatbag," Zark roared. He was angry now. His face turned a dark shade of purple. He reached out a massive, clawed hand to grab the human's shoulder and rip him out of the chair. Suddenly, a massive shadow fell over both of them. A hand, much larger and stronger than Zark's, grabbed the young warrior's wrist. It was Captain Vark. Vark was a legend. He was a veteran commander who had survived 100 space battles. He had scars all over his body and had killed things that would give a Krell nightmares. He was the meanest guy on the station. But right now, Captain Vark looked terrified. His face, usually tough and brave, had turned a ghostly white. His four hands were visibly shaking. He wasn't looking at the human's face. He was staring at that small, faded green jacket and the silver pin on the collar. "Stop," Vark whispered. His voice wasn't a command, it was a plea. It was full of pure, raw fear. Zark looked at his captain, confused. "Captain, it's just a human. I was going to teach him a lesson." "You fool," Vark hissed, his grip tightening on Zark's wrist. "If you touch a single thread on that coat, we are all dead. Everyone on this station. Everyone in this sector. You don't understand." Vark looked at the human, his eyes wide with respect and horror. "Look at the stitching, Zark. Look at the mark. That jacket isn't a uniform, it's a warning. It means he is the one who stayed behind when everyone else ran. It means he is the one who ended the war." The human finally looked up. His eyes were like two pieces of cold, black glass. He didn't look angry. He looked bored, and that was the scariest part of all. The young Krell warrior Zark stayed frozen. His massive hand was still inches away from the human's shoulder, but the air around them had changed. It felt heavy, like the gravity on the station had suddenly doubled. He looked at his captain, expecting to see a joke, but Captain Vark's face was pale green with sweat dripping down his scales. "But Captain," Zark whispered, his voice cracking, "he is just a human. They are small, they are soft. Their skin tears like paper. Why are you shaking?" Vark didn't let go of Zark's wrist. In fact, he pulled the younger alien back so hard that Zark stumbled. Vark's four eyes were fixed on that tiny silver pin on the human's jacket, the one shaped like a broken wing. "Size means nothing in the deep dark, you idiot." Vark hissed. "Look at the pin. That is the mark of the void. It belongs to the 13th Division. Have you not read the history of the Great War? When the swarm came and ate the stars, the humans lost their home planet. Earth was turned to ash. Most human fleets surrendered or ran to the edges of the galaxy to hide. They gave up, but the 13th Division, they didn't. The bar was now so quiet you could hear the hum of the oxygen recyclers in the ceiling. Every alien, the lizard-like Gorax, the floating gas beings, and the multi-limb traders, slowly backed away from the corner table. They weren't just moving away from a fight. They were moving away from a ghost. The 13th didn't have a planet anymore. Vark continued, his voice trembling. So they lived in the void. They didn't use big ships or bright lights. They became ghosts. They would appear inside enemy command centers out of nowhere. They didn't use blasters because blasters make noise. They used other things. They fought until the swarm, a race that had eaten 1,000 worlds, decided it was easier to leave the humans alone than to keep fighting the 13th. The human finally moved. It wasn't a fast move. He simply set his glass of water down on the metal table. The clink of the glass sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. He looked up. His eyes weren't filled with fire or rage. They were just empty. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the end of the universe, watched his family disappear into stardust, and realized that nothing in this bar could ever hurt him more than he had already been hurt. It was the look of a predator that had grown tired of hunting. "I'm just trying to finish my drink," the human said. His voice was very soft, almost a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the room. It wasn't a threat, it was a fact. The chill that swept through the bar was physical. Zark, the brave warrior who had been ready to break the human's arms, felt his knees go weak. He realized that if he had touched that green jacket, he wouldn't have just started a bar fight. He would have started a funeral his own. Captain Vark didn't waste another second. He pushed Zark down into a low, respectful bow, a gesture usually reserved for kings or gods. Vark then bowed his own head, his forearms crossed over his chest in a sign of total surrender. "I am sorry, Great One," Vark said, his voice shaking. "My soldier is young. He was born after the fires went out. He is stupid and has no respect for the legends that walked through the dark so we could live in the light. Please, do not take offense. We are leaving. We were never here." The human didn't say, "It's okay." He didn't tell them to stand up. He just went back to staring at his water, his fingers lightly brushing the fabric of his sleeve. "The jacket." Vark whispered to Zark as they backed away slowly, never turning their backs on the man. "That green fabric is made from the banners of their fallen capital. It isn't a uniform, Zark. It's a funeral shroud, and anyone who tries to take it from them becomes part of the memorial." As the captain dragged the warrior away, the human reached into a pocket and pulled out a small, old-fashioned metal coin. He flipped it onto the table. On one side was a picture of a blue planet that no longer existed. On the other side, it simply said, "Still standing." The message was clear. The 13th Division didn't want glory. They didn't want power. They just wanted to be left alone in the cold silence they had earned. But if you poked the ghost, the void would poke back. The air in the broken gear bar became cold, like the heater had finally given up. Every alien in the room was staring at the human and the Krell. The whispers were getting louder. They weren't laughing anymore. They were sharing old stories, tales told by space travelers who had survived the worst wars in history. "I heard about them," a small, four-armed trader whispered to his friend. "The 13th Division. They didn't have big fleets like the others. When their home was gone, they stopped caring about survival. They only cared about the mission. They say one man in that green jacket once climbed onto the hull of a hive ship while it was moving through warp speed. He didn't use a bomb. He just used a screwdriver and a piece of wire to shut down the oxygen. Thousands of enemies died, and he just walked away." Another alien, a scaly Gorak, nodded his head. "My grandfather saw them once. He called them the shadows of Earth. They don't fight like soldiers. They fight like demons. If you see the jacket, you run. If you see the silver pin, you pray." But Zark, the young Krell, was too proud to listen. His heart was beating fast with shame. He had been humiliated in front of everyone by a soft human and his own captain. He didn't believe in old stories. To him, the human was just an old man who got lucky. "Stories," Zark hissed, spit flying from his mouth. "I don't believe in ghosts or fairy tales. This man is flesh and bone, and his bones are about to break." Zark's hand moved toward a hidden knife in his belt. He was fast enough to kill most warriors before they could blink, but he wasn't fast enough for a ghost. Before Zark's fingers could even touch the handle of his blade, the human was gone from his chair. There was no sound. There was no blur of movement. It was like the universe had skipped a second of time. One moment, the human was sitting down, tired and bored. The next, he was standing an inch away from Zark's face. The human's eyes were no longer dull. They were sharp, focused, and terrifyingly calm. He didn't draw a gun. He didn't even clench his fist. He simply reached out and placed his hand on Zark's wrist, the one reaching for the knife. Zark laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "You think your tiny hand can stop me?" He tried to pull his arm away, planning to crush the human with his other 3 arms. But his arm didn't move. Zark pulled harder. His muscles bulged, and his scales turned a dark, angry red. He used all his strength, the kind of strength that could rip a steel door off its hinges. But the human's hand was like a mountain of solid stone. It didn't shake. It didn't sweat. It just held him there, pinned in place by a force that didn't seem possible for a creature so small. "You are making a lot of noise," the human said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the murmurs of the bar like a razor. "Noise is for children. In the 13th, we learned that the loudest thing in the room is usually the first thing to die." The human increased the pressure just a little bit. Zark felt his bones begin to groan. The Krell's 3 eyes widened in genuine shock. He looked down at the human's hand. It wasn't just a hand. It felt like a hydraulic press. The silver pin on the human's collar seemed to gleam in the dim light, almost as if it were watching him. "You want my jacket?" the human asked softly. "You have to understand what it's made of. It's not just fabric. It's soaked in the salt of a billion tears and the dust of a dead world. It's heavy, boy. You aren't strong enough to carry it." Captain Vark stepped forward, his face full of panic. He didn't try to fight the human. Instead, he grabbed Zark by the neck and forced him to drop the knife. The blade clattered onto the floor. "Please," Vark begged the human. "He is a child. He doesn't know what he is doing." The human looked at Vark, then back at Zark. For a moment, the entire bar held its breath. They expected the human to snap the Krell's wrist like a dry twig. But then, the human let go. He didn't push him away, he just simply stopped holding him. Zark stumbled back, clutching his wrist. It wasn't broken, but the deep purple bruises were already appearing. He looked at the human with a new kind of look, not anger, but pure, unadulterated terror. He finally understood. This man wasn't a soldier. He was a survivor of something so terrible that a Krell warrior was nothing more than an insect to him. The human sat back down and picked up his water. "Next time you want to be a hero," he said without looking up, "pick a fight with someone who still has a reason to live. It'll be a fairer fight." The room felt like it was under a spell. No one moved. No one breathed. The Krell warrior Zark was still on his knees, staring at his bruised wrist. Those 4 dark marks on his skin weren't just bruises. They were a message. A human, a creature he thought was weak, had just overpowered him with 2 fingers and a thumb. The human didn't sit back down this time. He stood tall, and for the first time, people noticed how he carried himself. He didn't stand like a soldier on parade. He stood like a predator that had nothing left to fear. He looked at the crowd of aliens, and then his eyes settled on Captain Vark. "You mentioned the siege of Orion, Captain," the human said. His voice was low, like the growl of an old engine. "You have a good memory. Most people want to forget that war. It was too messy, too quiet." Vark nodded slowly, his hands still trembling. "I was a young navigator then. We saw the sensor logs. We saw a single human ship fly into the heart of a sun crusher weapon. We thought it was a suicide mission." The human pulled his jacket tighter. "It wasn't a suicide mission. It was a trade, my world for theirs. My life for a billion others. I wore this jacket when the shockwave hit. I watched through the reinforced glass as my home, Orion 4, turned from a blue marble into a glowing coal. Everything I loved, my garden, my books, my daughter's laugh, it all became ash in a second. The bar was so silent you could hear the distant clicking of the station's cooling fans. The aliens, many of whom were cold-blooded killers, felt a strange, heavy tightness in their chests. This wasn't a story of a hero. This was the story of a man who had survived the end of his world. "That is why this jacket is a warning," the human continued, stepping closer to the center of the room. "Most soldiers fight because they want to go home. They fight because they want to win a medal or get a paycheck. They are careful. They take cover. They worry about their skin." He pointed to the silver pin on his collar. "But the 13th Division, we have no home to go back to. There are no medals left to win. When you fight a man who has already lost everything, you aren't fighting a soldier. You are fighting a ghost that is looking for a reason to finally stop walking. I don't care if I live or die tonight, but I promise you, if you make me move, I will make sure you never move again." Just then, the heavy blast doors of the bar hissed open. A squad of the station's peacekeepers marched in. These weren't honorable soldiers like Vark. They were paid mercenaries, thugs in shiny armor with heavy shock batons and laser rifles. Their leader was a bloated, gray-skinned alien named Sledge. Sledge looked around at the silent bar and laughed. "What's this? A funeral? We heard there was a fight. Who's the troublemaker?" Zark, still on the floor, tried to warn them. Don't touch him." But Sledge didn't listen. He saw the human, one small man in a dirty green jacket, and he saw an easy target. He walked over, his heavy boots clanking on the metal floor. He tapped his shock baton against his palm, the blue electricity crackling. "You, monkey," Sledge barked. "You're coming with us. This station has rules about assaulting citizens. Give me that jacket and put your hands behind your head. The human didn't even look at Sledge. He looked at Captain Vark. Captain, tell your friend here what happens when you try to take a ghost shroud. Vark stepped forward, his face pale. Sledge, listen to me. Put the guns down. Walk away. You don't know who this is. This is a veteran of the 13th. You are walking into a grave. Sledge laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. I don't care if he's the king of Earth. He's in my station now. Boys, take him. 2 mercenaries stepped forward, their rifles leveled at the human's chest. The human didn't flinch. He just sighed, a long, tired sound. He looked at his water glass one last time. I really wanted to finish that drink, the human whispered. Then, his eyes changed. The tired old man disappeared. In his place stood a shadow. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't scream. He just stepped forward into the path of the rifles, his hands open and ready. The air in the room didn't just feel heavy anymore. It felt like it was screaming. The bar felt like a powder keg about to explode. Sledge, the mercenary leader, felt a bead of sweat roll down his gray neck. He was used to people begging for mercy, not standing there with open hands, waiting for him to make the first move. The human hadn't moved a muscle, yet Sledge felt like he was staring down the barrel of a planetary cannon. I said, hands behind your head. Sledge barked, but his voice lacked its usual bite. The human took a single step. It wasn't a fast step, but the 2 mercenaries with rifles flinched. Their fingers tightened on the triggers. Don't, the human said. It wasn't a shout. It was a cold command. If you fire those rifles, the energy splash in this small room will kill half the people in here. I might die, but you definitely will. Is that worth a jacket? Sledge looked at the human's eyes. He saw the ghost of the void that Captain Vark had warned him about. He saw a man who wasn't playing a game. In that moment, the mercenary realized that the human wasn't guarding his life. He was guarding the peace of the bar. If a fight started, it wouldn't be a duel, it would be a massacre. Sledge slowly lowered his shocked baton. He signaled his men to stand down. Get out. Sledge hissed, trying to save what little pride he had left. Leave the station. Now, before I change my mind. The human didn't thank him. He didn't even acknowledge the threat. He simply reached down, picked up his small, battered canvas bag, and slung it over his shoulder. The heavy silence returned, thicker than before. As the human began to walk toward the exit, something incredible happened. Every single alien, the massive Krells, the scaly Goraks, the traitors, and even the criminals moved. They didn't just step back. They cleared a path so wide and straight it looked like a royal hallway. No one spoke. No one cursed. Even the sound of glass breaking in the background stopped. The human walked with a steady, rhythmic pace. Thump, thump, thump. His boots on the metal floor were the only sound in the entire Broken Gear station. He passed Zark, the young Krell, who was still on his knees. Zark looked up, his 3 eyes full of a new kind of understanding. He didn't see a monkey anymore. He saw a titan dressed in rags. The human reached the heavy blast doors. He paused for a second and looked back at Captain Vark. The siege of Orion, the human said softly. The 13th Division remembers those who stayed out of our way. You're a smart man, Captain. Keep your boys away from the shadows. With that, he stepped through the doors and into the dark, cold hallways of the docking bay. Inside the bar, the tension finally snapped. Everyone exhaled at once. Zark stood up shakily, rubbing his bruised wrist. He looked at his captain, his voice a low hiss. Why did you let him go, Captain? We have 20 men. We have heavy blasters. He was just one man. Captain Vark turned to Zark, his face finally regaining some color, though his hands were still tucked behind his back to hide the shaking. Because Zark replied, looking at the empty doorway. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for a moment of peace. And in this galaxy you never, ever disturb the peace of a man who earned that jacket. Vark walked over to the table where the human had been sitting. He picked up the small metal coin the human had left behind. He looked at the image of the dead planet Earth and the words, still standing. He destroyed those mercenaries before they even pulled their triggers. Vark whispered. He destroyed them with his eyes. He let us live because he's tired of killing. If he ever decides he's not tired anymore. There isn't a fleet in the galaxy that can save us. Out in the docking bay, the human boarded a small, unmarked ship. It wasn't a warship. It was old and dented, just like his jacket. He sat in the pilot's seat, checked his silver pin one last time, and pushed the throttle forward. The ship slid into the blackness of the void, disappearing instantly. He was just one man in a faded green coat, carrying the weight of a fallen empire on his shoulders. The galaxy was massive, full of billions of stars and trillions of people, but as Captain Vark knew, it wasn't nearly big enough to hide from a human with a jacket and a grudge. The 13th Division was still out there, and they were still standing.